me something like money?
Hi, everybody. We have another episode of Practice Prosperity. We have a special guest, Theresa Viera. She does family law. We're going to dig into how she grew her practice, some of the things she's implementing in her practice, and we're going to get some general information about what happens if you find yourself in a situation where you or your partner wants to leave. So it's going to be a good episode, a lot of golden nuggets. So let's go and get into it. So how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Randall. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So, can you tell me a little bit about yourself, the firm, and some of the population that you serve?
Sure. Well, as you noted, I am a family law attorney. I have been practicing family law for over 12 years now. I can't believe it's been that long since I graduated law school and passed the bar exam. But I started practicing family law in the Charlotte area here in North Carolina, where I'm at. And I worked at a couple law firms. And then in 2020, I decided to go out on my own, open my own law firm. So in July of 2020, yes, just a few months after the global pandemic hit the world, I was like, well, I'm at home, not really doing much else, not traveling. And I'm like, let me try this whole adventure, if you will, of opening my own law firm. So I opened the law firm and we focus our practice areas on family law. I do say areas because family law encompasses a bit. It encompasses not only divorce. So a lot of people like to say, oh, you're a divorce attorney. I'm like, I'm a little bit more than that. So yes, we handle divorce, but we also handle child custody disputes, child support disputes, spousal support issues. So financial support from one spouse to the other, property distribution issues, debt distribution, domestic violence, child abuse cases. We even do guardianship. So let's say you have an elder that's being abused in some way, shape, or form. We can step in there. And a number of other family law related topics, such as prenups, even.
Very good. So let's take it back, way back.
Sure.
Did you always know you wanted to be a lawyer? What was your origin story?
Sure. That's actually a tricky question because I've been in and out of the court since I was a kid. So the first time I was actually testifying in front of a judge, I was 12 years old in the judge's chambers as a result of a very violent domestic violence, child abuse situation that my mother and I found ourselves in. It wasn't the first time, and unfortunately, my mother had endured it long before I was even born. But finally, my mother was able to get out of that very violent situation in marriage with the help of her family law attorney. And in my little world, in my little bubble, in my little child mind, I was seeing how the court system was influencing my situation and who I could see in my position as a child was actually making change happen. And that person was my mom's family law attorney. She was able to step in, get us a domestic violence order of protection, get us possession of the house, get my mom some money. And I was able to actually go to school and all my activities as a child safely because of that protective order and the orders put in place. That all was supported by certain arms of the judicial system to include, the judge, the clerks, the bailiffs, the sheriff's department, the local police department, a local nonprofit organization that provided therapy services and other types of support for someone trying to leave a domestic violence relationship. And from all of that, from all I experienced, I'm proud to say we got out, but I will also say it was hard and sometimes unnecessarily hard. And so it dawned on me, if I want to be an influence of change, that I wanted to also become a family law attorney so I could help influence that change. Because there's nothing like changing a system unless you're in it and actually seeking for change.
So because you went through those experiences, when you take on a client, like, are you a little bit more sensitive, more caring, more patient? Like, how has that approached how you practice?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say it is one of the founding principles upon which our practice is based. And what I mean by that is, for example, not every relationship that is unhealthy necessarily has domestic violence. But early on, me and every person on my team, whether it's an attorney, a legal assistant, or a firm administrator, they are all trained in how to identify domestic violence, even if when our clients call in, they don't identify as experiencing domestic violence. And we do that because we do treat our domestic violence situations a little bit differently. So, for example, let's say I have a non-domestic violence case come across my desk, and that client has a lot of property. I will go ahead and tell them, okay, I need these property documents, these bank statements, these mortgage statements, all this stuff that you're very well in tune with. And I'll be like, get that to me by Friday. And 9 times out of the 10, my clients are like, oh, sure, yeah, I can do that. If I were to say that same statement to a domestic violence survivor, they will approach it very differently. Why? Because one tool of domestic violence is financial abuse. So when I say, oh, go get those bank statements, they may say, I don't even know if we have a bank account. Go get those mortgage statements. I don't even know if we have a mortgage, or if we do have a mortgage, I don't know the bank that it's with. I don't know where to find these documents. That type of control was asserted to that survivor, I like to say, if they're able to make it out, in a way that prevents them from even knowing some of the basics that you and I may need to represent a client that's not in a domestic violence situation. So that informs every maneuver of how we start a representation, start a case, and we call it empowerment representation. But then go one step further, the empathy piece is very important as well, because if you can't relate to the person you're sitting next to at the table during a consultation or as you're representing their legal interests, then you don't have any buy-in. And in family law, I like to say that my clients are welcoming me into their family situation, even if I never meet their kids, because I'm learning more about their situation than maybe they have shared with anyone, including their mom or their best friend.
I think that's interesting. We don't think about that as far as when they come to you, they could be crying out for help. It could be in a dangerous situation. And, they call it in my world information asymmetry, meaning one person has all the knowledge while the other person is just trying to escape. I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
So moving on through, you said your background, you went through those ups and downs, but you also made it through to get your law degree. So
Yes.
what was that process like? Because we think of a system where the parents can pay for their kids' college, but that's not always the case. How did you maneuver that system with limited resources?
And I wouldn't even just say limited resources. We had negative resources because as I was applying to college, my mom was actually going through a bankruptcy due to all the debt that was incurred by my biological father because of the financial abuse. And it was a really good maneuver, legally speaking, for her to commit the bankruptcy. But that also meant that she couldn't co-sign or necessarily support me financially when I was pursuing my college and then law degrees. I will say one coping mechanism, if you will, was always education. So I applied myself to my studies in high school. I applied myself to different activities that, honestly looked good on a resume when I was applying to college. So I was fortunate to get a number of scholarships from different universities after applying and getting in. And I just weighed our options. And one of those options was going to, honestly, one of the most expensive undergraduate universities, George Washington University up in DC. Wonderful school. Love being an alumni. But I will say it was very expensive to go there because not only did I have the school costs, but I had the housing costs in DC. And although people love to complain about housing in Atlanta and in Charlotte, there is nothing like DC. It is a very expensive city, more comparable, I would say, to New York City and LA. And I did incur all those expenses. And as a result, I took out student loans and I worked throughout college while also applying myself to those studies. I studied international affairs, conflict and security. Side note, warring countries are very similar to warring spouses. So I will say, and it comes down to the basics of everyone wants education, healthcare, housing, and security for those that they love. So whether it's a country fighting for that for their people, or it's a mother fighting for that for their child, it's a similar type of psyche, which I found interesting. And then I went to law school, and luckily I would say went to one of the best law schools, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill School of Law. Yes, I'm a Tar Heel. You didn't have to ask. And yeah, put myself through there, and also had to take out student loans. But we made it through.
What was it like? Because you're in college, you see either a roommate or people that you're friends with call home and say, hey, I need $20, I need $100. You probably weren't able to do it as easily as they could. Like, how did you cope with that mentally?
Ooh, that's a tough one. It's funny you say exactly that, because I remember, I don't know if I was necessarily a sorority type of chick, but I did rush. And one of the sorority girls was going over the fees, and she's like, well, just call your parents and they'll pay for all the sorority costs. And I was like, haha, yeah, we're not from the same world. Like, I am not from the world where I can do that. My mom did the best she could. I'll be honest with you and the listeners, that was $50 a month, and $50 even, 15 years ago didn't go very far. And so I like to say in DC, there's no such thing as a dollar menu. It's called a value menu. And so I had to make ends meet. That meant sacrificing a bit in terms of, different things I sought after. If it was not covered by financial aid, I likely did not participate in it. Even if financial aid was available, I was always cognizant of the dollar signs. And so I only borrowed when I absolutely needed to or truly wanted to. So, for example, I did a very, cost effective study abroad program in college, but I was already living in a very expensive city. So I didn't want to, say, spend a semester in France. But then when I got to law school, fortunately, student loans are actually a little bit more lenient, if you will, for law students, because they think you're pursuing a viable career. And that's when I was able to study abroad more so than in my undergraduate studies. And I worked with the financial aid department, as well as, friends and family, and more so on like making sure I had someone to co-sign, because who's going to trust an 18-year-old with a $100,000 loan, right? And so it was very much working the tools available to make sure I was able to accomplish that college and then law degree.
What was the feeling when you went to the judge and you were sworn in as an official attorney? Like, what type of emotions? Because that was a journey to get to that point.
Sure was.
What were you thinking about at that time?
Oh my goodness. That's a wonderful memory, Randall. Although I primarily practice in Mecklenburg County, which is Charlotte, North Carolina, I actually got sworn in Gaston County. And so we have courthouses based on the counties. And the reason why is my law firm at the time, that I was working under, Sean and Angela. And in Gaston County, it's a lot more community focused, if you will, of a courthouse situation. Everyone knows everyone else. It's not necessarily a big city feel. And the reason I bring that up is in the swearing in ceremony in Mecklenburg County, they're usually swearing in like 100 attorneys. Whereas in Gaston County, I was like, one of my bosses was able to schedule a hearing just for me to be sworn in front of a Superior Court judge. And my mom was actually able to hold the Bible that I swore upon as I made my oath. And it was, it was just me. Like, there were no other attorneys getting sworn in. So it was a very personal, very intimate swearing in. It only took 15 minutes. And I know there are people in the pews behind me in the courtroom with actual legal cases pending. But even they were clapping at the end of it, just because, my mom was there getting emotional. And I was there with two of my mentors in front of a judge that I had, bonded with. And I remember that memory to this day as being a very special memory for me, because all that hard work and all the sacrifice and all the pain and all the joy even of different experiences up to that point led to finally me being sworn in as an attorney.
Cool. I like that. Now that you're sworn in, you have to actually go to work.
Oh, yes.
What did you do after you were sworn in? What was your first job?
Oh, well, I was an associate attorney for my first law firm. I worked cases primarily in Gaston County and Mecklenburg County. And for me, Gaston County, again, a lot more of a neighborhood feel. You learn everybody in your neighborhood pretty quickly. Charlotte, it's more like the flashy big city lights. So the cases definitely reflected that. It was learning the cultures of different environments. I ventured out because I was young, didn't have a family, didn't have a spouse. So I was like, okay, well, I will learn more about Charlotte. I will learn more about Gastonia. I will learn about Statesville and all these other cities and towns in North Carolina to really get a full view of how the law works. Because family law specifically is very much a local type of legal matter. So here in North Carolina, for example, family law trials are in front of a judge, and the judge may have just been at the holiday party you went to at Christmas. And so it's very intimate type of setting versus, say, if you're dealing with an IRS tax dispute and you're in a federal court and you're with a judge who maybe doesn't even live in your town. And so because of that intimacy, I was able to grow connections, grow my client base, and just grow my ability to learn in different situations because I exposed myself to so much in those early years of legal practice.
I wonder, because you went to undergrad in a large city, you have some international aspirations because you studied that early on. What keeps you in a smaller town? Why don't you have the desire for Charlotte? I understand that when you get past the bar, it's within the state, and that takes a while to expand. But what makes you stay there?
That's a great question. First off, the weather. So I'm originally from up north, born in Jersey. It's too cold up there. Taxes are too high. So there's just some like realities of a life situation. But honestly, it's amazing how intimate family situations can be, but have an international component. I say that because a lot of people move to Charlotte in the Charlotte area, even Gastonia and Gaston County, and they will have not only legal disputes that cross state boundaries. So, for example, we're about 20-minute drive from South Carolina here in Charlotte. So we have a lot of cross state borders there. But I have had cases where the children are visiting family in India or Egypt or someplace in Europe. I have a divorce right now where my client is technically abroad, not even in the state of North Carolina, but I'm serving his needs from a family perspective. Because even though the legal case may be very local in front of a judge that I just saw at the holiday party, my client and their case's needs do actually have international components.
So because North Carolina is unique that way. First of all, y'all had a lot of huge influx of businesses in a short, probably 20-year span.
Yeah.
So you are able to get all of that in your practice, and even in a small town, is what you're saying.
Yes, yes. I mean, we have business disputes. For example, a business may be incorporated in Delaware, but it's being distributed as marital property in a divorce here in North Carolina. We have to bring in lawyers across those states to really work through those issues, for example. Yeah, great point.
Any advice for a young lawyer getting their first job? You've been through law school. They told you this is how the world works, but you get in a law firm and now you're dealing with the day-to-day grind, potentially double hours, client servicing. Like, any advice for young attorneys going into their first job?
I would say two things. The first is forget everything you learned in law school because you didn't learn anything. What you learned was a way of thinking. You think about things differently because you've endured 3 years of law school. Treasure that, not necessarily the information that you learned. So I'll start there. When you actually are, say, in private practice specifically, if a lawyer chooses to do so, right? Because they could actually become an assistant district attorney, a public defender. There are other routes that a new attorney could go. But if you are working one-on-one with clients, sales is going to be a valuable skill. And no, I don't mean the sales of the car salesman trying to sell you up to the more expensive car on the lot. What I mean by sales is we can only serve our clients if the client retains our services. And so you essentially, in use of sales, have to convince the client that you are valuable enough to pay the rates of attorneys. And the secret's out, attorneys are not cheap. So you really want to find someone who, as a client, want to find someone who you work well with, who you trust. And from the attorney side, that means you got to sell yourself. Just because you have the law degree doesn't mean anything to the client. But can you relate to the client? Do you have empathy for their situation, especially in family law? Do you want to prioritize their needs? And their needs may not be the knowledge of how to get a divorce in North Carolina. Their needs may just be, I want to be safe. I want to know I have money to pay my bills. I want to know I have a house to cover my head, but also my child's head. And if as a new attorney, you understand more of the people skills and the sales skills, that'll make you a better attorney for the clients you serve.
And I never thought about that. The ability to bring in revenue to the firm is sometimes a reflection of your ability to service a client.
Yes.
That's humongous. Interesting. So, but you took it to the extreme. Not only did you want to work in a family practice, you wanted to open up your own practice, be the rainmaker, the salesperson extraordinaire. What was that decision? What was that itch to become an entrepreneur? Where did that come from?
That's also a really good question. Oh my goodness, you're like hitting me with all the good stuff. I have to say and be honest that I did not imagine becoming an entrepreneur or law firm business owner. I really did go to law school focused solely on serving my clients. And so I just wanted to be an attorney. I didn't want to worry. I wanted to grow my own book of business, of course, because I want to serve the people who come across me. But in terms of dealing with payroll and taxes and overhead costs and balancing books and everything that comes along with running a business, I was like, yeah, not for me. Until I was in a situation where, first off, different law firms operate differently. And I was like, I think some things could be better. From a business standpoint, from supporting attorneys, supporting the support staff that supports the attorneys. And then the pandemic hit, and I realized if there is not a way for me to decide what the firm values or business values that we stand by are going to be where I'm working at, then the only way to really create an environment that has the culture I think is conducive to better serving my clients is to open my own business. At the end of the day, if you're a business owner, you have authority on your values, on your culture, on your procedures. I mean, you have control over everything, right? Like you have control of when your office hours are open. You have control if, there's the policy that you have to respond to client calls on weekends or not. And with that ability to be creative and honestly to have control over those decisions, I created Modern Legal to not only incorporate better business practices, in my view, that would better serve family law clients, but go one step further. Don't forget about the modern word in our title. It was to bring along innovation as well, which I thought was necessary with a global pandemic. I had worked with attorneys prior to the pandemic that didn't even have internet in their office. And here we are trying to have virtual court hearings, discovery productions and document productions via email or some online type of cloud-based system. And to do that, you have to update your technology. Your team has to be innovative on how they serve our clients. I just had a consultation where my client was in her car, right? And that's fine because I know she's in a private setting, that the conversation is just between us, and she doesn't have to come all the way to my office just to get the legal information and advice that she needs.
I think that's so important. Let's talk about 3 months before and 3 months after when you went out on your own. What was that fear in your system? What were the knots? Did you make sure you had a big pile of cash before you made the leap? Did you call all your friends and tell them like what was the going on? What's the human side of starting your business?
I'll begin with the reality that at that point, about 8 years into practicing law, I had worked on building a network. And I had worked on building that network since right after graduating law school and starting private practice. And what I mean by that is I would network with financial advisors. I would network with accountants. I would network with other professionals. And so 3 months before I went out on my own, I called them up. One of those individuals that I had connected to in my networking builds websites. So you best believe I called him up. And it was funny because he was the chief marketing officer of a new company. And he's like, well, Theresa, I don't build websites anymore. I'm like, maybe you don't for other people, but you are for me. And he's like, okay, I'll do it. And it was more so because he knew my passion over the years that we knew each other. And as a friend, he built the website for me. And I needed a website for a law firm that was going to go into the new age of digital and cloud-based technologies. And so I went ahead and, connected to all of them. I started putting my ducks in a row, started reading the rules and the laws as it pertained to opening a business. And it really was 3 months prior to me launching the firm that I made the decision, okay, I'm going to do it. Here are the people I need to connect with. Also keep it a secret because I was still working at the time at a law firm. Do it incognito, get my ducks in a row, especially during a global pandemic. That's a lot harder than it is today. Because even the people I would call at the Secretary of State would be like, great question. I don't know how this is going to work because everyone's on quarantine. Either way, I worked through those turmoils, made a lot of friends along the way, found out I had support in areas I didn't even realize. I had people reaching out to me saying, I knew you were going to open your own law firm. You just didn't see it yourself yet. So that was amazing to recognize in that process. But once I got the paperwork in order, once I got everything cleared by the North Carolina State Bar, the North Carolina Secretary of State, as well as my local banker to make sure the accounts were open so I could start transferring clients and bringing in new business, I was able to hit the ground running on that first day. I would say a couple weeks because I did have to transition out of my old firm to my new law firm.
Now, that's big. I think people don't realize starting a business is a community affair. It's a community of the people you know, it's a community of your associations. And it does take, I had my friend build my first website. So it's little things like that you really don't take for granted. It's actually a little sentimental, like, hey, they keep a kind of a special place in your heart.
Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure. And I could not have this business without my network and community. It just would not exist. And on the flip side, it was, being able to trust and rely on those resources to then be able to create this business that now serves their situations, their families. I just had a friend pull me aside and she's like, my son needs help. And I'm like, I am there. Because that's how it works, right? That's how it should work. That's how business and community relationships should work. And I'm just honored to work alongside the people in my network.
I like it. So for all the clients I serve, and even the guests I interview here, the pandemic changed a lot with their businesses, whether it's a lot of remote work, a lot of virtual assignments. How has technology changed because of the pandemic? Because the law area is a slow adaptive to a technology. So they had to accelerate really fast. So how did you leverage that time to really differentiate yourself in your business?
I love this question because you are so correct when you say the law is very slow to adapt, very slow. And although I am an attorney and I go to court pretty often, unfortunately, I can't just change the system alone overnight. Some of the big changes we've seen in North Carolina, though, which are notable and admirable, is that we are adopting an e-court system. So by early 2025, the whole state, should be on an e-court system where you can view documents online through a portal. We as attorneys can also file and serve documents through a separate portal, but also a portal for e-file and serve, which is huge for family law cases. Because on one side, we used to have to physically file a complaint at the local courthouse in the county where generally the children resided. So maybe I'm hired on a case I'm here in Charlotte, but the children live in Statesville, which to the listeners who don't know, that's about an hour and a half drive, depending on traffic. And that's tricky, right? Because you first off need to draft the complaint, have your client review it, sign off on it, make sure everything's correct, get all the filing fees, get all the paperwork that goes with a complaint, because it's not just a one-page complaint that has to be filed. Then physically drive. Maybe it wasn't me. Maybe I sent a legal assistant, but still, someone has to physically drive that hour and a half, file it with the clerk. That takes all of maybe 2 minutes, maybe 5 minutes if there's a little line. Then has to drive all the way back. And that's all attorney's fees that my client has to pay, because that's our time, because we're not able to spend that time elsewhere on a different case. And with the adoption of this e-court system, now I can, Randall, I could file a complaint while I'm still talking to you on this podcast. And it's amazing because then my client does not have to pay for that 2-3 hour endeavor. It's going to take 10-15 minutes instead. We'll know when it's filed. We get everything electronically. There's no paper. I don't know the last time you purchased ink for your printer, but ink is expensive. So speaking of owning a business, I'm thinking of all these different costs, not only that we incur, but more importantly, our clients incur, and how can we make it more efficient? So yes, the adoption of technology has shifted, and I appreciate North Carolina coming on board with this. I would say the other thing is what I noted earlier, adopting virtual meetings and virtual court hearings, which has also saved an enormous amount of time.
I think people miss that, yeah, it's beneficial to the practice owner, but we pass down those savings to the client, whether it's we can serve a large variety of clients in a short amount of time, but everybody wins when we leverage technology. But
Agreed.
As a business owner, you now have to manage people. You have to begin to delegate tasks. Were you a natural manager where it's like people come to you and do everything that you want exactly the way you want them to do it? Or how was your progress of building a team under you to support your practice?
I would say, as a practicing litigation attorney, very early on, I had to have a team. No matter what an attorney tells a person, if an attorney, other than our traffic attorneys, so I'll do a gentle nod to them. They can handle a lot on their own. Oh, they impress me so much. But in terms of family law litigation, if a family law attorney says that they're doing everything on their own, be concerned, because there is really no way to handle all of our family law cases alone. Because while I'm sitting here, a client could call in right now and say, hey, my child's not at school. I don't know what to do. And we are that set of first responders, if you will, to that family's needs. I've had domestic violence situations just spring up. I've had, unfortunately, children being kidnapped. And it's these types of things where I have to have a team in place, because if I'm in the middle of court, I'm not just going to have my clients call and email go to voicemail or my inbox. I'm going to have a team in place so that we make sure we can address that client's needs as soon as possible. And it could be, I step out of the courtroom, give them a call real quick and just say, hey, got your message. I'll respond, take a deep breath, we got you, and then go back into the courtroom. And so it's imperative to have that team that's working for the greater benefit. I think for me specifically, because I had always worked in some type of team environment my whole career, it wasn't as hard to shift to owning my own firm, because one team member did actually come with me, but my network provided. So people who knew what I stood for and who wanted to be on my team organically became members of my team. I would say that's actually how. So we have 4 attorneys, soon to be 5 attorneys, but all the attorneys on my team right now all became members of Modern Legal, team members organically. I didn't have to post a job, job application on Indeed or anything like that. It happened organically. Support staff a little different, just because they're not all from from the legal industry. And for me, it's more important to have that culture fit and that alignment of values, because a lot of the skills can be taught, but someone valuing someone else's family situation can't be taught, right? You can't necessarily teach empathy or valuing time with your children, or the concerns that do arise in family law cases.
How are you attracting these amazing attorneys to you? Like, are you smiling a lot? Are you shaking a lot of hands? Are you speaking at local schools? Like, what is bringing them to you?
Yes, and yes. So I as a business owner, which I have definitely taken on more, is going out into the community. One, just showing up. So if you show up to different networking events, if you show up to different legal activities, if you show up for your local nonprofit fundraiser, if people see your face and you're involved and they know you're a family law attorney, then people generally want to be around you, because they know you don't just say you support the community, they see you supporting the community. And if I'm trying to attract people who are also supporting the community, then I'll see them, right? And so I try to then follow up with those interactions, whether it's scheduling a coffee or scheduling a business lunch or getting a think tank group together. For example, I should say recently, but it's been over 2 years now, I organized a group of law firm female owners and business leaders. So they all are either partners or they actually own their small law firm. And we come together once a month, and it really is just going back and forth in different ideas and different challenges that we face as female law firm owners. And every once in a while, someone will be like, hey, I know someone's searching for a job. I'm like, hey, maybe I have a position, and same vice versa. And so that fluidity of support and that fluidity of being a community really just leads to those organic connections through which I've built my legal team.
Who taught you about that? Making community, building a community, showing up. Was that your first law firm that this is what they did on a day in and day out basis? Like, to me, that has to be somewhat taught, or something that you grew up in the household. Like, where did that come from?
That's a good question, Randall. I don't know if I've really thought that in depth. I mean, yeah, I definitely was exposed to the importance of connections and sales, if you will, at my first law firm, which I'm forever grateful for. I think the community aspect, though, really was ingrained into me when my mom and I were trying to escape the situation we were in when I was a child, because it really was a community stepping up. I mean, we hadn't even lived in North Carolina that long when we called for help to our local police department and they responded. It wasn't, too far into my mom's decision where she was literally flipping through the yellow pages at Barnes & Noble. Actually, she was at a Barnes & Noble flipping through yellow pages to try to find an attorney. And she vetted her attorneys by the way their voice sounded on their voicemails, because she was calling after hours. And it was reaching out for help, which is the first step when you're trying to escape a family law situation, but then also the community's response. And the way that the community responded to me and my mom in that situation taught me early on that you can't do anything worthwhile alone. You just can't. And so I think that just stayed with me, whether it was, my first jobs in high school and in college, to being a member of different organizations, to then opening my own firm. Community is just, it's the bread and butter that helps all of us strive and really grow together.
Yeah. So in the South, and they may say it everywhere, they always say a term, it's cheaper to keep her.
Yeah.
When somebody thinks about, hey, I'm thinking about separating, what are the total costs? What does it usually cost for somebody to break a union?
In some situations, yeah, it would be cheaper to keep her. And I would say that when you still are in a healthy marriage or relatively healthy. And what I mean by that, there is still communication. There is still the willingness to, say, go to couples counseling. There is still that love there. So I like to tell some of my prospective clients, who hopefully never become clients because they're staying in the relationship, that there are other tools that we can utilize from a legal perspective to help facilitate a healthy marriage. I'll give an example. I had a client one time come in and she said, I want a divorce. And she was giving me all these things about how she makes more money. He doesn't necessarily contribute to the household bills, yada, yada, yada. And I never once heard that they couldn't communicate, that was a violent situation, or that she didn't love him. All I heard was financial concerns. And so the very first thing was, first off, let's talk to a financial advisor. How about we start there, not just run to the courthouse filing a divorce. And then second off, there is the tool of a postnuptial agreement. And long story short, we put all those concerns and address them in that postnuptial agreement so that they did not have to divorce to address those financial concerns. And go figure, at least to my knowledge, they are still married as we sit here today, because we were able to address their concerns, their financial issues as a result of a marriage through different legal tools before it got to the point of, I definitely want a divorce. Now, on the flip side, let's get to the question about cost. Should you actually be going through the separation and divorce? You're going to be like, of course, you always hear this too, but it does depend. It depends. If we are able to have spouses that come to an amicable resolution, that is always more cost effective, more time efficient, because we can take whatever they've agreed to, formalize it in whatever legally enforceable documents are needed, and sign, seal, deliver, and you're done. In North Carolina, as compared to Georgia, I know this is different, but in North Carolina, we do have a year of separation before a party can get an absolute divorce, which is changing their status from married to single. And the reason why we have that in North Carolina is because that's your year to figure it out. And if you don't figure it out, that divorce can be granted. And then suddenly you may be caught in some other legal issues because you didn't take that year and use it wisely. On the flip side, it's also a year to be like, hey, don't rush to the courthouse just to get a divorce. We do want couples to work on their relationships if possible, but then also give them enough time to go through the process of trying to settle out their disputes. And, this is being recorded in 2024. Hopefully someone can still listen to it in 10 years. So I will say, with the year in mind, settlement, generally our settlements, they could be as low as $2,000 total for our clients to $10,000 to $15,000. Sometimes they're a little higher, especially if they're business owners, which is a fraction, and I can't reiterate this enough, a fraction of the legal fees incurred should a separation and divorce go through the whole gamut of the litigation process. In North Carolina, we do have the goal of resolving family law cases within a year. I nod with respect to that goal. However, inside I'm laughing a little because that very, very rarely happens to the cases that come across my desk, simply because of the complexity of how the law applies to family situations. So if we're distributing a business valuations are not simple. If it's a high conflict custody case, Maybe we need to involve therapists. Maybe we need to involve parenting evaluators. There's so many different pieces that come into play with the full litigation process that not only will it be costly because it takes so much time, but it may not be very efficient in terms of time. And yes, I've had that case. It's taken 3, 4, 5, 6 years to resolve itself because of the complexity of that specific case. Now, the more than 2 to 3 years is a rarity, yes. But as you can imagine, as an attorney, I step into some of the more complicated cases and will help my clients get across that finish line, even if it takes us 5 years to do so.
So this channel really supports business owners. So let's pretend like a business owner is thinking of leaving their partnership. How would you advise that business owner to get their affairs in order?
Great question. If I had a time machine, I would go back in time and say, sign a prenup. But if you can't sign a prenup, I will know. Most business owners don't. I get it. I didn't predict having a business. Go figure. And so the very first thing is business owners, please, please, please separate your business and your personal finances. That is key. The reason why I say that is, and I've had the case where if you mingle everything, then a judge or an attorney will not be able to identify what is revenue, i.e. money into the business, versus income, money to you for your financial needs. And it should be differentiated, right? Because revenue then has overhead costs that they have to cover. So revenue may go to renting your office space, may go to the payroll to pay your employees, may go to all those other costs that it takes just to operate your business. And so your revenue will never equal your income. But if we as attorneys and judges cannot see that, then it's very possible a judge could put on the paper when they're determining child support or spousal support that your income is that revenue number, because there's no other number that they can identify. So it is critical. Separate out those finances and document everything. So document, get your QuickBooks in order. If you don't have QuickBooks and you've been working from an Excel spreadsheet, hire a bookkeeper, bring in an accountant, get your financial documents in order, especially as it relates to the business.
I like that. Now, has your idea about marriage changed because you've been in this world so long? Do you still see it as, rose-colored glasses, a prince and a princess? How has working in this field changed your view of marriage?
Well, I'll first say that women empowerment, I'm a queen regardless of my marital status. I'll start there. Just throwing it out there to all my female business owners. And any female, really. But I'll say it this way. My concept of marriage as a child of abuse was very different than the average concept of marriage. I, early on, honest to you, thought husbands beat their wives. That was just the world I was exposed to. That's the environment. And it's not, I don't say that as a means to even garner any sympathy or empathy. I say that because that was my reality. And I was like, I'm never getting married. Why would I? Who would want that? I just did not understand why people got married until I was about 17 or 18 when I started volunteering with a domestic violence nonprofit organization. And it was interesting because although I was volunteering, I was creating mail lists and putting, people's names and addresses into an Excel spreadsheet because of their donations. I learned, oh, wait, that is actually a small portion of marriages. So when I heard the stat that 1 in 4 or 1 in 3 females specifically may experience domestic violence, I was like, thank God it's not 99%, because I thought it was that. I thought it was a lot higher, and it wasn't. So I was like, oh, so only, which still is too high, but only 25 to 33% of women experience domestic violence or sexual assault or, those types of abuse, then that means that there are healthy relationships out there. that there is a different way of marriage. And so I was very cautious when I started dating. I'll be honest, I didn't really start dating seriously until my late 20s, which is very different than maybe a lot of individuals out there, because I still, it's one thing to be taught that there can be healthy relationships, is another thing to believe something, to truly believe. And then I didn't get married until my late 30s. So I finally found my person. I like to say we had a fairy tale situation, if you will. But it's funny because people are like, how is married life going? And I'm like, not really different than non-married life. I'm still my independent self. I'm still, working, on maintaining boundaries, whether it's with my husband or with friends or with clients, just to make sure I keep my mental health in check. And no one's perfect. So because no one's perfect, no marriage is going to be perfect, but rather it's how you address the conflict and how you address the problems that will arise, and making sure you do in fact address them, so that you don't have the situation where suddenly someone's spending all the savings, or someone's cheating, or other indications of an unhealthy relationship come about.
So, what is one thing, and I know this is outside your box slightly, what is something you would say, I am tired of folks coming into my office complaining about this? This is not that big of a deal. You need to work this out, and that would be better for everybody involved. What is that one thing that you consistently are seeing coming into your office?
Yeah. Asking for parenting advice. I'll say it broadly as that. Let me preface that I am happy to help my clients with any and everything that they need. I really am. I appreciate being asked. However, and actually on my podcast, Legal Lounge, we just address some questions that we see often. But one of the questions we see is, how do the tickets to graduation for the child get split? Trust me, no judge is going to assign graduation tickets to the parents and family members. No judge is going to do that. They don't have the time, they don't have the bandwidth, nor do we want to give our judges the authority on handing out graduation tickets for our child. Stop. No. If you come to me, I will think of different strategies on how to do that. So, for example, we discussed the option of, well, let's involve the child. If this is the child's middle school graduation, for example, maybe the child doesn't even want their parents. Maybe they want their closest friends involved. Obviously the parents could say, well, no, we're going to at least reserve a ticket for each parent. Could be high school graduation, could be kindergarten graduation, right? So involve the child to the extent they have the ability to say their opinion without pressure, without undue pressure. On the flip side, maybe it is the mother and father sitting down together and hashing it out together. Or if they're not able to, because they just cannot talk to one another, maybe it's a numbers thing. If you get 10 tickets, one parent gets 5, the other parent gets 5, and they disseminate the tickets as they see fit. And so for me, it's more of like different strategies that we can approach to parenting type questions. But at the end of the day, I'm not the parent of this child. The judge is not the parent of this child. We have a lot of tools to help you parent, but still, you are the parent. I need you. Sometimes I'll be like, I need you to step up.
I like that. Interesting. So what's next for you? How do you see your firm growing? Do you plan on obtaining more attorneys? Do you plan on going on a speaker circuit? What are you working on in the future?
I love that question too. So we did just release our own podcast in January of this year called Legal Lounge. So my hope is to spread that legal education to as far and wide, to as many people who may need it. Because even though I'm licensed here in North Carolina and my team serves North and South Carolina, there are just concepts generally taught that apply to everyone. And I'm talking globally, right? With that noted, for my community here in North Carolina, there is the problem, and maybe I don't know if it's a thing of the South, but there are what we call legal deserts, where there are places in full counties that don't have their legal needs being served. And if you're a person that has a family, it's like you need a family law attorney. at least someone to call, even if you don't have a family law case, but at least a resource in every county, in every community. And it exists here in North Carolina. It is a problem. The North Carolina State Bar recently had a panel discussion on it. It's actually available online if anyone wants to contact me to get a link to it. And it's a serious problem. No one should go without. No one should go without knowing that they have rights to see their kids. No one should go without knowing their rights about their business, about their marital situation, about just being safe and in healthy relationships. And I truly believe that, because if my mom and I did not have those resources, we wouldn't have made it out. And so spreading those resources is a paramount goal to my firm. And going one step further, actually being legal advocates to anyone in North Carolina who needs us. With the adoption of technology, as you pointed out earlier, we want to be able to serve anyone who calls us, regardless of the county in which they reside, to provide them family law services in the Carolinas.
I do have to ask, what is your potential solution to that problem of legal deserts? Is it to have more attorneys? Is it to provide an incentive program to go into different areas? What do you think the solution, or it could be technology? What do you think the solution should be?
I think it is definitely growing, bringing on more attorneys, expanding, having more offices. So at least right now, kind of just brainstorming with you, it's having our offices with multiple attorneys in, say, the metropolitan areas in North Carolina, but then also going one step further, having the satellite offices in the smaller towns, so that people, because when you talk about your children, when you talk about your finances, when you talk about abuse, it's very impersonal to have that conversation just by phone, but it's a lot more personal to have it in person. So if we can set up those platforms, whether it's just a one office shop in a very small town, we want to set that up if there's enough legal need there for us to do so, and request for it. And so I imagine us having main offices with like small attorney armies, if you will, but then having these small offices throughout North Carolina in case someone wants to meet in person. But then go one step further. Yeah, it is utilizing technology to make sure that we are able to have a virtual meeting with any of our clients, because this is a lot more intimate than a phone call. But also on the flip side, making sure our clients have access to internet, have access and the wherewithal to be able to use their smartphone if they don't have a computer for a virtual meeting with an attorney. And this, we did find out during the pandemic, there were attorneys that would go to parking lots of Walmart or Starbucks coffee shops to get an internet connection to do virtual hearings. That's unacceptable. We as the judicial community need to work with, our internet providers and technology service providers to make sure we have very basics provided to everyone, including internet access, even if that means working, say, with our local libraries to have those computer stations set up, for example.
So if somebody's watching this and they say, this is the person I want to represent my family, what are the best ways to get in contact with you?
That's a great question. Well, first off, we are in the Carolinas, so North and South Carolina. If you are in Georgia or you are in any other state, feel free to still give us a call, but we would have to refer you out just because we're not licensed there yet. I'll say it that way. But if you want to give us a call, our phone number is 704-286-6302. We have some prompts. Just click on through and we'll patch you to a team member. You can also find us online at modernlegalnc.com and follow us on the different social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, even Pinterest. We have a Pinterest board at Modern Legal NC or at Modern Legal. And I'll do the last little plug for our podcast, Legal Lounge, which I hope anyone, wherever you are, can listen to it, not just here in the Carolinas. And our Legal Lounge podcast is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and our YouTube channel at Modern Legal.
Well, thank you very much, Theresa Viera, for joining us. I think you dropped a lot of nuggets. It's a sensitive topic when we talk about divorce, child support, custody, but I think more knowledge can put people at ease. And I think you did a lot of that today. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Randall. It's been a pleasure.
If you've been inspired to leverage your practice to create financial freedom, please schedule a consultation with Deasil Wealth Management. The legacy you dreamed of is a 15-minute phone call away from becoming a reality.
The more I know, the more money I can make.